Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the infatuation trap and how emotions can ruin relationships. A quick disclaimer, I'm not an expert on relationships or marriage, and this video is simply for entertainment purposes. So the credit for the tips and the content in this video goes to the author of this book called I Choose Us, which I highly recommend. It's a great book. So a couple questions to think about. How do you obtain a healthy marriage? A marriage that is fulfilling and satisfying. And in their book, they divide the marriage into 3 stages. And these stages are just for representation purposes, but I think it does help. So the first stage is the stage where you are in love. You fall in love with that person that means the world to you. And this stage is, if you think of these stages as a fire, this first stage where you are in love, you fall in love, you're in the infatuation phase, the fire is just burning wildly. It's just burning, you don't have to really do anything, it's just a strong and wild fire. And the second stage, which they refer to as a love connection, is where the fire is no longer just wild, but it's a steady fire where all you gotta do is just kind of tint a little bit, adds a few logs when needed, and the fire is steady. And the last stage is what they call the disintegration stage. So this is where essentially the fire is about to die out. And research shows that marriage affects our health, our work, our parenting, and it needs to be taken seriously. So like I mentioned, falling in love is a stage that is also referred to as the infatuation phase. A key word here is that it is a phase. This phase doesn't last, and it simply cannot last. When you're in the infatuation phase, research shows that there are chemicals that are being released in your mind. And these chemicals makes it seem like you're kind of on an autopilot. So towards the other person, it is super easy to be creative. It's super easy to be generous. It's super easy to think of wonderful things to do to encourage that person. It is just so easy, and all you can think about is the other person. So like I mentioned, the key to be aware of infatuation phase is that it is a phase and it lasts about 1 to 2 years. A lot of breakups happens within the first or the second year. And after the infatuation phase is over, a lot of people conclude that because their emotions have changed, like you no longer feel the same way because the chemicals are not being released, they conclude that they must no longer be in love with that person. So many people end up concluding that they're no longer in love and they decide to end the relationship. So another important thing to be aware of is that in the infatuation phase, our emotions dictate our behavior. And in the next stage, which is referred to as the love connection stage, the key here is that our behavior, our actions dictates our attitudes. So rather than being driven by our emotions, we're driven by our actions, like our will, our decisions rather than our emotions. If you come to a place where the relationship doesn't seem to no longer be just going so smoothly and you're a couple years into a relationship, I do want to highlight again that you just need to be aware that the chemicals that was released during the infatuation phase are no longer being released. And this is where you're no longer autopilot. You got to put in the manual mode and you got to put in a little bit of work, a little bit of effort. And this is not a bad thing, because imagine if our relationship was always based on emotions. So one day we're up, the next day we're down. If the person that we are in love with do something that really encourages us, we feel great. If they do not meet our expectations, we feel terrible. They may even crush us. So to have a relationship that is purely based on these really strong emotions is probably not the healthiest in the long run. So if you feel like your relationship is in the stage known as the disintegration phase, here is a couple of tips. First one is simply to be aware that a relationship cannot always be an autopilot. So I simply encourage you to consider that you may have to put a little bit of work into the relationship. You have to take a few more logs and add it to the fire. And there's something fascinating about human behavior. Whatever we invest in becomes valuable. The more we invest, whether that be time, resources, energy, or monetarily, the thing we invest in becomes more valuable. So if you decide to invest in your relationship, and of course it is a decision, you can decide to invest. And this can be regardless of how the other person responds or doesn't respond, but you decide to invest in a relationship. You invest your time, you invest your affection, you invest your energy, you invest yourself. The more you invest, the more valuable the relationship is going to be. So this is where you have to allow your behavior to dictate your attitude. And I believe, and research also shows, that if you choose to use the right behavior, the loving behavior towards your spouse, then your attitude towards your spouse is going to increase for the better. So I encourage you to allow your mind and your behavior to dictate your action towards your spouse, not your emotions. So even if your emotions at the current moment may not be the most favorably towards your spouse, I encourage you to try this, to become consciously aware that you do have a choice of how you decide to behave towards your spouse. And if you can just make a small step to behave in the way that you know is true, that you know is right, that you know is loving, even though your emotions may not be behind that, I believe over time, the more you do that, your attitude, your feelings towards your spouse are going to change, and likewise, your spouse feelings towards you, if you keep acting loving, kind, generous way, will also be better. So hopefully that's helpful to be aware of the infatuation trap, that it is a stage, it is a phase, it will end. That does not mean the relationship has to end, but at this stage, you get to a deeper love connection that requires a little bit more work, but that will last, and hopefully will last to the end. Hopefully that was helpful. If you liked the video, please give a thumbs up, and hope to see you next time.